Hi all, this video is going to be a short summary of the story Kerosene by Mahmud Rahman. So he was a writer and translator, originally from Bangladesh, and is now a resident in California. The story Kerosene is taken from the collection Killing the Water, which portray the violence and desperation during the partition era. So the story is set in the years of insurrection and war in Bangladesh. The story brings out the horrors of war and how a gentle society can turn violent under torture. The story talks about how colonialism or oppression works and the strategies used by the colonizers. The story opens where a group of people waiting for the narrator of the story to light the torch and set the warehouse on fire. 13 women, 23 children, and the corpse or the dead body of a man were packed inside the warehouse. One woman refused to let go of the body of a man, and that's how this corpse of the man got inside the warehouse. They taped the mouths of the crying women, and muffled cries came outside of the warehouse. People were shouting, "Burn them." The narrator of the story says that it's been days since he was hearing stories that can drive him mad about the cruelties. In the afternoon, they splashed kerosene on the walls of the wooden warehouse, and the narrator is burning the warehouse. And even the 10-year-old boys tried to grab torches in their hands, but the narrator pushed them back and barred them from coming near. Now the story goes back to the past of the narrator and explains how he ended up here, burning these women and children alive. So when he was 10 years old, the narrator's uncle, his mother's brother, went missing. His mother pleaded for his life to the magistrates and the constables. She always stood tall and straight in her life, but in order to save her brother's life, she begged on her knees and they laughed at her. 2 months later, his uncle came out from the prison, but he had a stutter in his speech and he has become an irritable man. Earlier, this uncle was an artist, a drummer, a singer, and a great storyteller. The ones who ruled them feared the spirit inside people like his uncle, and they tried to break it. So his uncle became a victim. Now he talks about the things that led to this violence. So he is saying that Westerners, refugees, the barbarians, all were living among them, and most of them spoke a common language. What happened to his uncle made him think as us and them rather than we. Now he is describing who the Westerners are. They arrived 50 years ago to these native peoples, the narrator's territory, offering help during a dispute that the natives had with the people of the north over a silver of a contested land. The Westerners, we can assume that they were from Pakistan, and they offered soldiers and protection to the natives. And then later, through flattery, they permeated into the territory of the natives. They wrote up a new constitution, and they slowly imposed their rules over the natives. And the natives started to notice that the ships departing their ports were laden with more cargo than those returning. They imposed their language upon the natives too. The natives, they were usually very gentle people, soft in speech, and they made a living out of earth and water. They were patient. Finally, slowly, the natives learned that their gentleness proved to be their weakness. The breaking point came as their people started vanishing. 2 well-known scholars, a few students, and a doctor who talked against the Westerners vanished without a trace. So the native women, they gathered in open fields, sat underneath an ancient tree, and began to speak about all these things. The crowd grew into thousands within a month. When the resistance began, most of the people among the natives, who were fisherwomen, boatmen, tobacco leaf rollers, they all had these questions in their mind. Who's going to stand up against the Westerners? They believed they were weak, and when compared to the Westerners, they were weak. So 3 16-year-olds, including the narrator, dared to start a group against these Westerners. They were sympathetic to the rebels. When the group of 3 16-year-olds told these people, the natives, that they are going to stand up to the Westerners and that they will build solid cells of resistance in each streets, the others laughed at them. The others called this plan the daydream of children. The Westerners, on knowing about the meetings, ordered to cut down all the trees in the open fields where the crowds gathered. They appointed the natives itself to do this. The natives refused, but the men were beaten and The women were put in prison cells. These people, as they came out of the tortures, as they came out of the prison, they became strangers to their loved ones. They had scars, and the narrator says that every single one of them came out with a piece of their mind taken away from them. The Westerners, or the ones who ruled these natives now, they had this idea that the way to stop the resistance of people is by having a mighty first strike against them. So, on one midnight, the Western soldiers invaded the streets and fired guns in all directions. 10,000 people died that night. The natives called the night as the night of the bullets, and they started calling the Westerners as the demons. At some part of the capital city, some young native men resisted using their knives. Even though all of them died, their stories became a legend. The others wondered how these young men became so courageous. They had to face so many hardships under the soldiers of the Westerners during the next few days. The natives, they were scared and they stayed indoors in fear. The narrator and his group grew in number. They fled to the western side of the river and they formed troops and started to attack back. The narrator and his committee split into separate patrols and he joined the patrol headed towards where the running dogs live. Now, who are these running dogs? They were actually the refugees. The refugees had also lived among these natives almost as long as the Westerners. They came from the north. The Westerners used the common religion to bond with the natives. The refugees also belonged to the same religion or the same faith. When the crisis over the contested strip of land happened, these people, these refugees, they were squeezed out and they became refugees and started to live among the natives. The native elders, they welcomed them and sympathized with their sufferings. They set up restaurants and some became tailors and lived in harmony with the natives. But after the Westerners solidified their power, the refugee community became the favored group of the state. They were granted cheap loans and jobs, and they spoke the same language as the Westerners. The relation between the refugees and the natives became tense. Behind their backs, the refugees mocked the natives. They became more and more like the Westerners and saw the natives as weak, ungrateful, and black. They started to be known as the running dogs among the natives. When the agitations began, the narrator even approached these refugees, but out of fear of the Westerners, they didn't join them. Then what happened was that the narrator's patrol team, they marched towards the running dogs settlement, the refugee settlement, and as they neared the road, the narrator's best friend got killed. He was shot dead. They killed the ones who shot him, and they put these 23 children and 13 women, along with the corpse of this dead man, this dead sniper, into this warehouse. And the narrator had to lit the fire. This was the scene that we saw in the beginning of the story. The narrator then with his team fled into the jungle as the demons or the Westerners sent reinforcements and assaulted the town. His mother chose to stay behind as she believed that they will spare an old woman. And in the forest, camps had been set up for these people. He saw more than 100 men and boys at the camp. This narrator, he is now in the camp, and since it rained, he stood in front of a store and a young boy joined him. The boy asks for a light for his cigarette, and the narrator answers him, "I am done with having lights." The narrator then explains everything that has happened as the boy inquires what has happened. And after hearing everything, the boy says, "It's wartime, things happen." And then the boy asks him some questions. Could you not have stopped it? Could you not at least tried? These were the questions that the boy asked. The narrator's guilt makes his mouth dry and he couldn't even speak. Blood rose to his face. The story ends where the narrator thinking, what the hell does he know? I want to smash in that smug face. The narrator is upset. He doesn't want to acknowledge his guilt. So this is the story. Now talking about the title, kerosene is something that we use to burn a fire, right? So just like that, it refers to anger paving way to destruction. Hatred, discrimination, jingoism, the belief that one's own race is greater than the others, and intolerance paved way to the destruction. So this is what the story is all about.